So in under 5 minutes, I want to tell you 6 reasons why you might want to pick and 3 reasons why you might want to run away from the Sony A6300 in 2023. I have used this camera personally to shoot every kind of project you can think of. Travel, documentary, weddings, events, corporate, movies, television, everything. So let's talk about why you might want to pick one of these guys up. Well, first of all, the price. You can actually pick one of these guys up for as low as $500. And it's also a stills camera, which means if you do some form of photography, I like to do black and white candid photography, this is definitely going to help you with some really nice, crisp pictures. It also does 4K and it's really sharp 4K. It's actually a 6K sensor that is downscaled to a 4K image. I don't know if downscaled is the right word. The 4K is really crisp and there is a lot of detail. The downside though is that you can only go as high as 30 frames per second in 4K. If you want to do 60 frames per second slow motion, you would have to come down to HD, which is not as nice as the 4K, but you slap on a really nice lens on it, it's actually decent. It's pretty good in low light. I've gone as high as 3200 ISO a couple of times in the past without any worry or any issues. Yes, there is some noise and there will always be some little bit of noise, but it can very easily be cleaned up in post-production without any issues at all. The autofocus is decent. It was one of the best right around the time it came out, and you know, I put this thing on my gimbal and I'm never worried about my images not being in focus. It does tend to struggle a little bit when you're filming in S-Log, but when it does nail the focus, speaking of S-Log, we get S-Log 2 and S-Log 3 on this tiny piece of camera, and that gives us a really good dynamic range. I actually did a video where I compared the dynamic range of this camera to that of the original Blackmagic Ursa 4K. You can check the video out right here. It also has Cine 4, which is great for quick turnarounds. In case you don't have as much time to spend in color grading, you can just make some few little bits of adjustments, and you also get a decent amount of dynamic range as well. Just remember though that it's still an 8-bit camera. Even with an external recorder, you only get 8-bit 422 as opposed to the 8-bit 420 in camera. So as much as you can shoot S-Log 2 and S-Log 3, don't go overboard with your color grading because you could very easily break the image. However, the images from this camera are really good. You also get a wide range of affordable Sony E-mount lenses because of its APS-C sensor. My favorite lens is the Sigma 30mm f1.4, and I also have the Sony FE50mm f1.8. I have heard good things about the Sigma 16mm f1.4, but I'm yet to try it out, and perhaps that would be the next lens that I will be adding to my arsenal. So if you're really looking to pick one of these up, you really should be considering those 3 lenses. Maybe that and an 85mm. It's also small and lightweight, so it's perfect for travel and gimbal work. I always slap this thing on my gimbal, and I don't think I have ever balanced it properly because it's so small and light, including the lenses, that the gimbal never has an issue, you know, keeping it steady. Now let's talk about some of the reasons why you might actually want to run away from this camera. All right, and number 1 is the battery life. It's not good. It has a very poor battery life. You need about 5 or 6 to get through an entire day's worth of shoot, and that's if you're actually one of those people who remembers to turn off their cameras from time to time. So if you need a much more durable power source, then you might want to consider looking at some external battery sources. For example, using a dummy battery that you can connect to a V-mount battery, which is what I've done in the past. You can also take advantage of the USB, so it allows you to be able to charge the camera while filming via USB. The second major issue with this camera is the overheating in 4K. You can shoot in HD and this camera will not overheat. At least it has never overheat when I'm shooting HD, but when you're shooting continuous 4K, this camera would overheat. For those in hotter regions like us in Nigeria, you can be looking to get somewhere between 18 to 25 minutes continuous recording of 4K before your camera will overheat and shut down on you. For those of you in the colder regions, you can actually look to get between 30 to 40 minutes and even more, depending on how cool the atmosphere is when you're recording. But there are still ways to get around the overheating. One would be to think about what you're shooting. So for me, if I'm shooting anything continuous for 5 or 10 minutes, I tend to step down to HD, and then for for the quick shots like B-rolls and all of that, I switch back to 4K. That's how I've been able to manage using it. There are some other tips though to getting around the overheating. One of them is to extend the screen out, so keep the screen away from the body of the camera. That's one. Two is to use really fast memory cards. I've heard that that tends to also help. Another option would be the external power that we spoke about, so that the heat from the battery is away from the body of the camera. And then lastly is to use an external recorder, so that the processing of the image is actually happening on the recorder and not the camera itself. So when you combine all these things together, you will definitely see some improvement in how long you are able to record before the camera starts to overheat and shuts down on you. And then the third thing, and equally annoying, is that there is no headphone jack. That means you're not able to monitor the audio that you're recording. This has been very annoying. It has limited me. I have had to rely on external audio recorders like the Zoom H5 to record my audio, because then I can monitor it with headphones. But if recording audio straight into camera is very important for you and you're going to be doing things like interviews, yeah, you should run away from this camera. I exceeded my 5-minute mark. I'm sorry. Okay. If this video has been helpful to you, you definitely want to check out my other video where I reviewed the Blackmagic Ursa 4K, the original 4K, and I actually compared the dynamic range with this camera right here. So you should definitely go check that out. Until then, bye.